My name is Jeremiah, and I am here with Alicia, Laura, Mia, and Stephen. And we're going to be talking about the 1942 film, The Magnificent Ambersons, directed by Orson Welles. But first, let's introduce ourselves. Mia, other than The Magnificent Ambersons, have you watched any movies since we last recorded? And this will probably mostly be my answer too, so I'll just chime in with you.
So since we're going to have the same answers, I'm just going to talk about one. So we watched Romeo and Juliet, the 1996 Leo one, and it was so good. I haven't seen it in a really, really long time, and I loved that movie when I was younger, and Jeremiah had never seen it. So it was just such a psychedelic, intense, crazy treat. Was that what we watched and then the power went out? It was that night, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We recorded our episode about Passion of Joan of Arc, then we watched that movie, then the power went out.
Yeah. So it's kind of foreboding the Shakespearean tragedy that then
very much so. But it was so good. I felt like it totally held up. I can't believe that movie came out 25 years ago. Like, that's crazy. I feel so old right now. But it was so good. If you haven't rewatched it in a while, I highly recommend.
I have, and I have a different take.
Ooh.
But I thought, honestly, I thought everyone did such a great job, except Claire Danes wasn't quite sure what to do. I thought she was so beautiful. It just seems like she kept going to the cry mode in every scene. And I think she's super talented and I'm a big fan, but I just thought she kind of played it one note. Whereas Leo had all these different levels and there was just amazing. Tybalt was like ridiculously multifaceted and like I've never seen before, and visually it was incredible. But I was disappointed with Claire.
I liked it a lot more than I ever thought I would. I didn't think it was like the best movie I've ever seen, but I thought it was entertaining. And it somehow is both like the most 90s and the most timeless movie ever. I don't understand how they did that. I completely disagree with you, Laura, though. Like, I thought Claire Danes acted circles around Leo.
Interesting.
I thought she was so much more believable. There was just something about Leonardo DiCaprio's performance that I just didn't believe almost the entire time. It was just like this kid playing dress up in a way.
They didn't have chemistry. So I do think
there is that, maybe.
I get what you're saying, though. Yeah. It's interesting, but I really like the opposition. It's kind of fun.
Right.
Was that Baz Luhrmann?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Absolutely. My high school friends and I were all so into Moulin Rouge. We would like drive around and blast the soundtrack and stuff. So
I've seen that cute.
Yeah, no, we would like, oh my God.
I so wish I was in the car with you guys.
But yes, I've seen that movie a whole bunch of times. Love it. But I never saw The Great Gatsby. And then
Australia.
Strictly Ballroom.
Which looks
Strictly
nuts.
Ballroom.
Or Strictly Ballroom.
It's like my all-time favorite, sentimental favorite. Like I can watch
I've never seen it.
Any day, anytime. It always puts me in a good mood. I love it.
It's an amazing film.
I think I had not realized that Luhrmann had only made 5 movies. And
it's kind of crazy.
Such a presence,
Yeah, now I've seen 3 of them because I saw Australia and I saw Moulin Rouge. Australia is a batshit movie that makes no sense. It's like 5 different movies all crammed into one. It's so bizarre. I will not be rewatching that one. If you
I'm going for, complete, and it's only 5 movies. So
you actually made me want to watch it by saying that.
I know. Yeah. We watched a preview and because once we finished Romeo and Juliet, we're like, what other movies? Oh, we should watch more, and watching a preview for Australia. Yeah. It's like a war movie. It's Nicole Kidman and Hugh Jackman in Australia. There's like some class issue between them, but they're in love. There's like they adopt an Aboriginal child, maybe. I have no idea. But yeah, it just looks insane. Yeah, probably insane and probably insanely problematic in many ways in it.
It's a weird one.
Yeah.
But we also watched Minari and Nomadland together, which we both liked both of those.
Yeah, they're great.
Nomadland is like the best movie I've seen in a while, like new movie wise, and one of the best just overall that I've seen in a while. It's so good. And it's on Hulu, so it's easy to watch for most people, I think, who at least have Hulu. So I highly recommend that. And I finally got around to rewatching / finishing One Night in Miami. And I thought it was really good. So, It's kind of crazy how good an adaptation of a play can be if you just like do all the filmmaking very well.
Yeah,
So,
it's funny how that works, I think.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But Stephen, what about you? What have you watched since the last time we recorded?
It's kind of a record for me because I watched actually 4 other movies, which I'm not usually one to watch a lot of movies. So aside from doing this podcast, it makes me feel like, oh, I should watch more. So I Married a Witch, which was kind of interesting. It was made in 1942. And because Agnes Moorehead was in this movie, The Ambersons, and she actually plays Endora in Bewitched,
Ooh.
it made me think like, oh, well, maybe I should watch, this is what it was based off of. I Married a Witch was the inspiration for Bewitched. And that was also made in 1942, which is the same year that The Magnificent Ambersons came out. So I kind of wanted to see what filmmaking might have looked like with a movie that was more mainstream. So I really enjoyed it. It was a very short movie. It was only like an hour and 20 minutes. It seemed like a lot of those movies of that era might have been short. I don't know. It was enjoyable. It was fun. I also saw American Hustle, which I hadn't seen before, and that was in 2013. Everybody probably have seen it by now, but I enjoyed it for the most part. But I thought that Jennifer Lawrence was a little bit too young for that role. I mean, she did a good job, but like she wasn't completely believable as like a seasoned, like really erratic housewife.
They did that in so many other movies, like Jennifer Lawrence as Joy, like this like
Mhm.
50-year-old woman who invented the mop, the miracle, there was
Yeah.
like a time where they kept trying to fit her into everything because she was just so dynamic and beautiful.
Yeah. I felt like she was miscast out of everybody in that movie. She did a great job with what she was given, but it just didn't sell it all the way through for me. And I also saw this movie called Sparkle that was made in 1976. It was an African-American cast, and it was kind of based on the sounds of the 50s and the 60s. It was about this girl group, and it was starring Irene Cara and Philip Michael Thomas, who was in Miami Vice.
Miami Vice, yeah.
So it was a really good movie. It was interesting because Irene Cara ended up being the big star of that movie, even though I felt like she was understated in that one.
Who is that?
Irene
I'm not sure
Cara?
who that is.
Fame.
Yeah.
Fame.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
What a Feeling.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was where she made her big splash, and that was years later, I believe. And then the last movie I saw was Easy A, which I think everybody's seen at this point. And it was one of those movies that I always felt like I wanted to get around to watching, and I never did. And so it was just kind of a fun, like romp kind of movie. And I like Emma Stone a lot, and it was just kind of a nice movie to watch on a Sunday night. So
I actually haven't seen that, but
Oh,
I
you
heard
haven't?
it's so
Yeah.
funny. Yeah, people
Yeah.
love it.
yeah,
The Tooch.
Oh, he's in it?
Yeah, he plays her dad.
Oh,
right?
I love the Tooch.
Her
Yeah.
very understanding father.
they have some
Ah.
really like Patricia Clarkson's in it too, which
Oh.
I was like, wow, she's in this movie, but she was great. Like I really liked the family dynamics. It was very theatrical though. Like I didn't feel like they were a real family, but it was like a real like movie family because they were just very understanding, like cool parents. But yeah, it was a good movie. I enjoyed it.
I've always, for some reason, put that in the same category as, was it House Bunny that Anna Faris starred in? Does
Uh-huh.
anyone
Which is
remember that
such a
movie?
I saw
great movie. It's
Yeah, people, I was
so
like, this movie
much
looks so
fun.
dumb, so whatever, but people love it. I've never seen it either, but I just feel like these
so
movies, like-
underrated. Love
Yeah.
every
It's
bit of
actually
it.
it's one of those movies that's better than you think it's going to be. When you watch it, you're sort of, especially if you go in cold, you're just
Yeah.
sort of like, I like this a lot more than I expected to.
Loved it.
I agree.
And
That was my week.
Alicia, how about you?
I also watched One Night in Miami and really enjoyed it. And I didn't know going in that that Regina King had directed it. So I was very pleasantly surprised by that. She's great. The movie was great. And also didn't know that it was a play beforehand either. So I really didn't know that much about it going in. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was really thought-provoking and the acting was just amazing. It was so good. The guy that played Muhammad Ali, I thought was really great. I started Nomadland as well, but we couldn't quite finish it. It was like at night and my mom was falling asleep and I was kind of not really in the mindset for what it is. So I'll have to come back to that at some point. But Frances McDormand is always watchable and entertaining. So yeah, I'll get back to it. But that's about it. Otherwise, just a lot of masterpiece mystery and 2020 at this house. But I'll be back in New York tomorrow. So next episode, I'll have watched a much more interesting and thought-provoking movies that we can discuss.
It's warming up over here.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Because
Get ready.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. It's very hot here. So
Laura, how about you? What have you been watching?
I watched The Happiest Season. There's no the Clea Duvall LGBTQ Christmas movie.
Oh yeah.
And yes, I watched it in February and I really enjoyed it. It hit all the right notes. It was groundbreaking in the sense that obviously the big, reason of it, but then it gave you everything you needed in terms of a Christmas movie. And it also has one of the best lines I think I've seen in a film in a really long time. And I don't know if it's appropriate to say or not say, but Dan Levy says it in the movie and it's just, I think, really smart. So yeah, it's predictable and it has the perfect amount of cheese element for a Christmas movie, but it was really smart and really enjoyable. I liked it.
I saw that back in December. I also really enjoyed it. I thought it was really funny and sweet. And it actually there was actually a moment where, even though I knew I was watching a rom-com, where I was kind of like, this relationship might not work out.
I know.
I don't know why.
That's the thing. I was rooting for actually a different relationship in the film. Like, I don't know if you've seen the film, but there's a subplot with Aubrey Plaza. She was just so likable and cool that I was just like, this bitch, like I totally want to date her, and but I was happy with it anyway.
Yeah.
So for those who may not have heard our first couple of episodes, this is a podcast where the five of us are discussing movies that have appeared on Sight and Sound Magazine's poll of the greatest movies ever made. And that poll comes out every 10 years. The next one will be out in 2022, so we're using it as a prompt to watch some classic movies in advance of that. We invite listeners to take part in the discussions by watching along and sharing their opinions in our Facebook group, by emailing, or by leaving a voice message on our Anchor show page. And again, this time we're talking about the Magnificent Ambersons. But before we get into the history and background of the movie, I'm just curious, what did each of us know about the movie going into this viewing? Who's seen it before, or what were you expecting, if anything? And Steven, since you picked this movie, why don't you start us off and also tell us why you picked it?
I picked the Magnificent Ambersons because, first of all, it was funny because my last name is Anderson. So people used to call us the Magnificent Ambersons when I was a kid. So I immediately picked up on that. And also because I had seen Citizen Kane, and that was the only movie that I'd seen that was directed by Orson Welles. So I was curious to see how, his filmmaking might have changed within that year. I think, wasn't Citizen Kane made in 1941, and this was from 1942.
Right.
And I had seen Citizen Kane in college, so I would have rewatched it, but knowing that we're going to be watching it later for the podcast, I decided not to do that. So I kind of walked into it thinking that it was going to be kind of like this big family drama epic that spanned the generations, because I usually try to go into movies cold without knowing too much about it. So I just did watch the trailer and that was it. So I pretty much walked into it cold, and that's where I was when I picked it up.
Okay. And Alicia, how about you?
So I also knew that it was an Orson Welles film, and that I also knew that there had been a fiasco between him and the studio, and that it had been recut. I didn't know the extent of it, but I definitely knew that there was some sort of controversy, or at least that he felt there was some controversy in his life about how it went down. And that's pretty much all I knew. I also was sort of expecting the same type of thing Steven mentioned, like a multi-generational, like family epic saga. And I mentioned it on the Facebook page, but I always confused it with this other movie called The Forsyte Saga, which is like a miniseries, a Masterpiece Theater miniseries made in Britain. I guess because that's also a family thing. So for a little while, I was thinking I was going to be watching an American-made version of that. But then obviously I figured out that it was different. But that's pretty much all I knew going into it.
And Laura?
I went in cold. I mean, obviously I knew Citizen Kane and Orson Welles and information about his relationship with Rita Hayworth and, things like that. But the film itself, I went in cold.
Okay. And Mia?
Yeah, same. I had never heard of it before. I mean, obviously I've heard of Orson Welles and Citizen Kane, but if you had asked me who directed this movie, what is this movie 2 weeks ago, I would have been like, whatever, I don't know. So yeah, totally cold. Didn't have time to read anything about it in advance of watching it. So.
And I had seen it before, but it was back in college. So I really, watching it especially, I realized how little I remembered of it. But I think in my mind, regardless of whether I'd seen it or not, I just mainly knew it as Orson Welles' kind of half-lost masterpiece. Should we go ahead and tell people about the film? Released in 1942 and directed by Orson Welles, the movie depicts a wealthy midwestern family at the end of the 1800s and start of the 1900s. Based on the 1918 novel by Booth Tarkington, its prologue sets the Ambersons up as either the toast of the town or privileged aristocrats lording it over everyone else. After a young suitor named Eugene Morgan embarasses himself, and, by extension, her, the object of his affection, Isabel Amberson, chooses another man as her husband and has a spoiled son who others in the town hope will one day meet his quote-unquote comeuppance. After going off to school, this son, George, returns to his family just as his own father is in dire financial straits, and Eugene Morgan has himself returned from years away, both with a daughter and a successful business producing automobiles. After Isabel's husband passes away, she begins to actively rekindle her former romance with Eugene Morgan, who's obviously still in love with her. But this relationship upsets Isabel's son, George, who, fearing loose talk and scandal, keeps the two apart. The movie was Orson Welles' follow-up to Citizen Kane, a film we'll actually be covering soon, but which had caused some controversy. As a result, RKO, the studio behind both films, had lost some confidence in its deal with Welles, and after unfavorable test screenings, they famously recut the movie and shot a new ending while the director was out of the country. The cut footage was destroyed, and the film that went out to theaters was not the one Welles had planned. The incident only fueled the image of Welles as a quote-unquote difficult filmmaker to work with, at least as far as studios were concerned, which may have helped to make it harder for him to work as a director in the years to come. Despite the compromised state of the film, it's still regarded as a classic, though one that people tend to regard with a sense of regret for what could have been. So, Stephen, why don't you start us off again? What did you think of the movie? Did it meet your expectations as you laid them out before? It's as little as those may have been.
I mean, I had a kind of a high expectation of it because Citizen Kane, I really enjoyed watching it. I haven't seen it since college, like I said, but I really walked away from that movie, felt like it was really powerful and it was really well made. So I did expect it to have some of those elements to it. And it did. It did meet with my expectations. It did feel kind of like more of an event movie, just the way that it was shot and constructed. But it was just really like, it kind of hooked me from the very beginning because I liked how, it started out talking about men's fashions and talking about like how everybody thought of the Ambersons. So it kind of set up everything else in that movie to be like, everything that they did was thinking about what the outside world was thinking about them. So like, that's what I liked about it. So I kind of looked at it through that kind of perspective. And I really enjoyed it all the way through. I liked the performances of pretty much everybody. I liked George, even though he seemed a little one note, but there was a reason for it, especially how they set everything up in the beginning. You sort of understood why everybody kind of was acting the way that they were acting. But unfortunately, toward the end of the movie, like, I know we'll probably talk about this later, but the ending was one of those things where it made me so mad that it kind of retroactively made me not like the movie. So it kind of was a struggle. I did overall like the movie, but that kind of ruined everything else for me.
Yeah, that ending is it's not good. It's like one of the it feels so forced and out of nowhere.
You're talking about
but
the hospital scene specifically?
Yeah. So just out of left field sort of, and just out of the tone of the movie. But Stephen, I wanted to ask you though, since you were interested in this movie because people would call your family Magnificent Ambersons, having now watched the movie, are you at all insulted? Because I do think the name in the movie is like slightly ironic, if not totally ironic.
It kind of makes me think. Because because my family was super rich and we could do whatever we wanted, and I used to have those big pearls and the big hat, like going around town. Yeah, it does like bring a different perspective into it, because they were pretty dysfunctional. When you think about how they were, but they had reasons for doing it, and they had appearances that they need to keep up with. So, kind of.
I felt really robbed by the ending. I was very unhappy with it. It did. It didn't ruin the movie for me, because everything up to that was great. But I just was like, why couldn't we see the conversation that you had? I guess they could only get two of the actors to show up or something. I was like, you could have at least shown me the conversation you had in the hospital room with the guy. But yeah.
It was amazing to me that they did it that way. It felt almost like they handed them a page and they had to read off the page, and the way that they even structured that scene was just like, and after Fanny had gone through all of that, you saw how hysterical and like, she was up and down. She seemed very like she was on drugs almost, because she just sort of stared and smiled, and it was just like so out of character.
I thought the character of Lucy itself, she was on drugs the whole time. She was just smiling like, hi, George. Have fun, George. It didn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, Georgie was like the most insufferable character. I wanted to murder him the entire time.
There's nothing redeeming about him.
Nothing redeeming. Nothing. Like, I was like, you have this really weird like Oedipus complex with your mother where like you're a freaking grown adult man and you can't let her move on with this like really nice gentleman. And just the scene when she was like, when they decided to go to Paris and she was like hugging him to her breast and stroking his head, I was like, I'm nauseous right now watching this.
It's funny that you say Oedipus, because it's like a Greek tragedy. It was so heightened, so melodramatic. So yeah, it's not my turn yet.
Yes.
But that was so interesting, though, about like the dynamic that Eugene had with his daughter as well. Like I felt like both of them were couples. Like when you kind of watch them with their scenes together too, and maybe it's just like looking at it in a 2021 kind of lens. You sort of look for that stuff, and you kind of like, wait, what? Are they really daughters? Especially the way that they were introduced at the beginning. It's not like when she meets George for the first time, she's like, oh, that's my dad. She never says
it. Why not?
Yeah.
Just odd duck. Like basically this guy's insulting your father over and over and over again. And you don't just be like, dude.
I mean, I guess it's a good way to find out what he really thinks of your father.
Doesn't seem to get under
and
her
how
skin
much of
at all.
I know that. Yeah, I kind of felt like she took it pretty lightly, the way after all the things that he said, she kind of brushed it off pretty easily. She almost was just like doing it in a teasing way or something.
Yeah, I hated this movie.
Oh, wow.
From start to finish.
I kind of took, what was her name? Lucy, the daughter?
Yeah.
I kind of took her reactions as like, I guess a combination of she's kind of a cool character. Like, I mean, like temperature wise, like she's just sort of like even keeled, and that she is kind of toying with him, because they never really set up that she knows the history of the Ambersons that well, but it made me wonder if she did, and she was just like, I'm gonna fuck with this guy.
Right, but they never really show you that. And
Yeah,
I doubt that out of
But
the cuts, that the 45 minutes that broke Orson Welles' heart and his career had anything to really do with that, because I don't think he was as concerned with that as much as the decay of the family, the prophetic idea of innovation in the automobile, of what it did to, society. So I don't know if he really was concerned with Lucy and her inner workings. And I'd love to know what went on in the pharmacy when they cut away from her and she asks for a sip of water. Does she faint because she just got left? Or like, was this all just completely a facade? Because it certainly wasn't clear to me. It was aggravating and, infuriating at times, especially when the mother is holding Georgie to her bosom and just, basically giving up on her last bit of happiness forever, and we're just all supposed to take it, and just eat it up as if maybe that is what happened back then, but this spoiled brat of a son did nothing for her. None of it really got to me in like a good way.
Well, I will say I didn't particularly like any of the characters except maybe Eugene.
Right.
But I did still enjoy watching them basically ruin each other's lives.
Yeah.
But I also wondered if the reason that George was so against the romance between his mother and Eugene was because he had feelings for Lucy. And that could have sort of, obviously, they would have been stepbrother and stepsister at that point, and it would have been pretty strange for them to also get married. But she didn't really, not that she seemed to want that, but I just thought maybe from his perspective, that was something that he was concerned about. But yeah, it was another thing that was kind of never really, they never talked about that. So I guess it probably does fall more on the scandal side of that was his concern. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that just because of the way they set everything up at the beginning is that like they were very concerned about what everybody thought of them in that town. So the fact that like that was probably in his mind, it wasn't at the forefront, but he's also was set up to be one of those characters that he did whatever he wanted and whatever he wanted was great. So his mother, you know, what he didn't care about his mother's feelings, and his mother knew that she would accept whatever he said and do what she wanted, do what he wanted. That's what I felt.
Well, what's interesting, though, I think about George is that he doesn't actually seem to care what anyone thinks about him because he just thinks he's better than everyone, you know? So it's like he's running amok around that town in the prologue, just like being a complete asshole to everybody. Yeah. And he doesn't care that people are yelling at him and criticizing him because he knows in his own head that he doesn't answer to them. He only answers to this family that he imagines is at the top of the world, you know? And only finds out later that, no, not anymore. You guys are on the decline.
And he never really does. I mean, he gets his comeuppance in terms of his money going, but he never really, I mean, we're supposed to believe that he learns and apologizes with the prayer scene, etc. But no one ever tells him to shut up, ever in the film. Like,
yeah. And true. What does he law? I mean, other than the money, which I'm sure is something like now he actually has to get a real job. But even then, like the lawyer's like, oh no, like I don't want you working in the dynamite factory. So it's like, okay, even your fall isn't that hard. And I mean, I guess to me, I read it as more he's lost his mother, who I think he just really had this like kind of creepily tinged relationship with. And I'm sure he was like sad about losing Lucy, but I agree with you, Stephen, because I also thought there's like at the scene at the end where she's walking with her dad, and I was just like, oh my God, like this is so
yes.
I mean, she literally says, I just want to be with you.
Yeah,
that was
the way
creepy.
They're looking at each other, and that line, and
the way they played it. Yeah, it was the way they played that scene.
But I guess I thought to me like him getting his comeuppance was like he's lost his, you know, in order of probably caring, like he's lost his not even fiance, he's lost his love. He's lost his money and he's lost his mother and his dad too. But, you know, he didn't really seem that actually upset about that.
Nope.
Yeah.
I think that one character does tell him to basically shut up, though. Lucy does, because she's basically like, stop proposing to me. We're not doing this. And that's kind of where she reveals that she is just kind of maybe just fucking with him. Like she's just keeping him on a chain.
I wish that I believed that inner world existed, but I don't know.
I understand that criticism. I do. I'm not going to try to like say that this movie is perfect or not compromised because I think it totally is. But yeah, I think you might be right that some of that wasn't even there in the original version. I don't know. It's hard to say, but I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
Well, I also thought, to me, the part when she cut him the most wasn't even when she was like, stop asking me to marry you, but was when he's like, I'm going away forever. I'm never going to, and he like kept like ramping it up. He's like, I'm going on a trip.
Sure.
I'm going on a long trip. Yep. I'm never going to see you again. And she was just so like stone faced.
Like, even bye.
Bye. Oh, have fun. That sounds so lovely. And I was like, oh my God. It reminded me of like, I had like a flashback to like dating and just being like, oh, cool, that's nice, bye, whatever. You know, just this totally
came off a little bit
emotion.
Like a sociopath.
But I loved it.
Because even in the beginning when he's insulting the dad when they first meet, like he's incorrigible. He has no ambition. And she just kind of rolls around and they waltz as if he's just charming as ever. And even Eugene never says a bad word about George. And even when the whole automobile, the underlying theme of technology, innovation, and what the sacrifice is at the dinner table, when he's like, you know, it's a nuisance, and he doesn't disagree.
Right.
He says, you're maybe right. And maybe it isn't better for man and mankind. And it's just all very bleak.
Yeah.
I think that's the most believable of those dynamics, though, because he so obviously does not want to insult the woman he loves. And he sees that kid, rightfully so, as just a complete extension of her. So I totally believe Joseph Cotton's character, Eugene Morgan, like doesn't want to insult this kid, this idiot kid that he knows is wrong and he should just take out back and beat the shit out of. Like he absolutely knows that's what he should do, but that he can't do it. I buy that.
Yeah.
I would argue that is in the movie.
That's fair.
Whereas, like, I think you're right that the Lucy part isn't there.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add on to what you said, Mia, about like she acted like she didn't care and it was like dating. I felt like it was more like when you try to run away from home when you're a child and you keep upping the ante to your parents saying like, I'm going to leave the yard. I'm going to go outside the town. She wanted to, and she kept saying, see ya, okay. It was her trying to make him grow up. That's where I saw that with that. Like, are you ever going to just stop acting like a child and like man up and, you know, make something of yourself? And he wasn't going for it. He was just going to run away. That's the way.
Yeah.
I love it.
You really
I
were
love all the
Magnificent
inner world
Ambersons.
that you guys give to this actress, who to me just looked insane.
I thought with the scene that you were just talking about, Jeremiah, I also thought it was a very like when they go low, we go high kind of thing where he's like, I'm not going to like fall into your trap here. I'm not going to be rude to you. I'm going to like calmly respond with like a thoughtful, nuanced response. And then I'm just going to say, I have to go and leave. But like, you know, he was polite, he was collected. So I just thought it was also like, I'm an actual classy, mature human being, and it just makes you look like that much more of a child.
And to me, all that read as just melodrama. And if and this is going to be probably one of the most controversial things that are said, if I had to watch another 45 minutes of this family decaying in the true Wellian cut, I would have probably hated it even more because they were so annoying and over the top. It was some of the lines were just laughable. Like when he's in even the first instance when he's walking Fanny to her room and he's just just shoot me. And I'm just like, okay, if this guy doesn't end up shot at the end of the movie, then it's all a big waste of my time. So
I'm totally with you, Laura. We like paused the movie, like, I don't know, halfway through to like get up and like get a snack or something. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, I feel like I'm watching a dream where everyone's reaction is just that like 20% off, like more heightened or not heightened enough or just something where I was like, I just felt like I was constantly missing something like you do in a dream when you're like talking to someone and like, you know, you wake up and you think back on it and you're like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. But in the dream it does. And it was kind of driving me crazy because I was like, why is everyone freaking out about this? Like, why is this aunt just like hysterical about everything? Why is this happening? Like, I just felt but at the same time, it was like this, you know, family deal. Like, you know, all the things were normal, but just their reaction.
She won an Academy Award, right?
No, she was nominated.
She won.
It didn't win any awards. It was nominated for 4.
She won some other awards.
Yeah, she won a couple of other awards.
I feel like if you take each scene and you put it in its own movie where it had a completely different narrative, because I think she was amazing. It's just none of it added up. Her, you know, little girl thing at one point, the boiler scene, which we talked about, how he directed her. I mean, there's that whole story about how he directed her over and over again, giving her a different motivation. And then by the end of it, she was so fragile that all of the motivations that he wanted, the little girl, came out in it. So it was like the perfect shot. And to me, I was just like, none of this makes sense. She's losing her fucking mind. And we're all just supposed to be okay, you know, and then at the end, when she's completely composed, obviously it's tacked on and it doesn't quite make sense. But to me, I was like, well, thank fucking God, because this hysterical woman narrative that we wanted to go with, just because nobody wanted to marry her, wasn't really up my alley either. So I was just fine. I was like, okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah. To make that end scene make sense to me, it was just that she was finally out of the Amberson business almost. Right. Like she was able to kind of do her own thing at the boarding house. And that's why she was so composed. That's the only way it could make sense to me at the end, why she was acting like that.
Mhm.
And also the
Mhm.
huge part where they lose all their money, which seems like a lot since they own this town since 1873, to bad investments, quote unquote.
Yeah, I was confused about how they lost their money and what went on with the Isabel's husband, George's father. Why was he? We never really, or unless I missed it, we never really seemed to know
Nope.
exactly why he was in financial straits.
They made
Or how he
a lot
died.
of bad decisions.
Yeah,
Mhm.
the only thing the only thing that that they really ever specifically referred to was George spending a lot of money when he was in college.
Also, the
But I
headlight
cannot
company.
imagine. Okay, yeah, that's true. They did mention a headlight company, but that was the first mention I remember hearing of it. I don't remember hearing of it at any point before that until they said, "Oh, we invested in the headlight company and it all went bad." But I had no idea other than that how they had lost their entire fortune.
And it seemed like the point of view of the film was sort of anti-innovation. I mean, just how the automobile took over, created more death and destruction. You know, it seemed like the point of view was opposed.
I don't know about that because
Yeah.
the person that was the most opposed to it is the one
Got
that
hit
sort
by
of
the
ended up suffering the most because he wouldn't he didn't have any ideas of his own. He didn't have any ambition. He wasn't able to move with the times at all.
Yeah, I think the view of the film, like if there's a viewpoint to it, a perspective, I think it's a pox on all their houses because it's like progress is bad, but also the old way sucks. So we're just not doing something right here in the world. It seems to be what it is to me. Because I don't think this
Mhm.
movie gives you a favorable view of this family or what they stand for in this world. They seem like old and outdated and like they should be pushed aside. But the movie's also like, but should it be for this? Should it be for like progress of this sort that is dehumanizing and
Mhm.
just sort of leads to people becoming statistics in a death count or something like that?
So would you call that nihilistic?
Um, I don't know if I would, but I understand why you would ask it.
No, I think that's fair. It's just, to me, the overwhelming question that I thought of after the film was, who defines progress?
Mm-hmm.
And where do you go from there?
I think it's just an open-ended question. I think the movie is like just taking a look at something it sees in the world, or this story, because it's a book
Mhm.
before it's a movie. And I haven't read the book. I don't know how far the movie gets from the book, but I would assume there's a lot of this in there as well about like the that time in our history where things were transitioning and people didn't know what to do about it or if they should like let this happen. But I mean, it does seem to just be that you can't stop it, so you got to just figure out how to deal with it um, at
Yeah.
some point. Which is maybe that's nihilistic, but I think it's just more like an observation, and you have to kind of it's how you react to it more than like what you can ultimately do about it in a bigger picture. I think, but I don't think the movie necessarily even does a great job of showing what you should do in reaction to it because all these characters react extremely poorly to it, obviously. But
I don't think I don't think it answers that question. And I don't know if he was really trying to answer that question. But I do think it's sort of similar to what we're going through. I'm sure every generation goes through it, but what we're going through with like smartphones and screens and that type of thing in society now, it's like you can't get away from it. You can't escape it. It's very useful in many ways. It's transforming the way we do everything now, especially in the middle of the pandemic. It's so necessary. Is it great long term? Who knows? We don't know.
right.
We don't really know. But you can't just use your fax machine all day either. That's not going to work.
My fax machine.
Yeah.
You don't use your fax
Or your
machine?
beeper.
I use my fax
Old
machine all
faithful.
the
Me hanging
Just to be
out.
clear, I don't think he was trying to answer the question. I think he was just trying to ask it. I think it's like one of those types of movies where he's like, I don't care what the answer is. That's for you to figure out. Like, I'm just going to ask the question and walk away.
Yeah.
That's, but I don't know, like, because I think the ending does compromise it so much, and the missing
Mhm.
footage, no matter what it did, like, it's hard to tell what this movie was supposed to be. I think.
Oh, I just wanted to add to what Alicia said and what Jeremiah said about progress isn't really like good or bad. It's just progress, really. It's just like we're moving forward. We're just trying to figure it out as we go. But
I mean, I agree. I think I was watching the Bogdanovich, some YouTube videos about him interviewing Orson Welles and stuff, and how the preview cards and how people wouldn't sit still for the full version of the film. They hated it. Some people laughed at certain performances, but then there was 20% of the audiences that thought it was the best film that they'd ever seen. And how tragic it was that this is where they end up, because nobody ended up happy. Wells or Robert Wise, who had to recut the film, and their ties severed. And, you know, it seems it's kind of tragic all across the board.
Yeah. One thing just with the progress and technology thing, I thought it was really interesting that one of the youngest people in the film is the one who's so anti the automobile and the changes. Because usually in movies, and I think in life too, it's like, you know, younger people are embracing technology and are like, oh, horses, those are old. So I just thought that was weird and also just didn't necessarily seem that believable. Although I guess a lot of stuff in his character is this like kind of throwbacky, like, you know, I like so obsessed with his mom and, you know, just all that kind of stuff, to where he just seemed like a contrarian. So maybe it's more that like than anything.
So one note.
Yeah. Oh, he's totally one note. I think that's his purpose, is just to show that kind of person doesn't have much to them, though. But I do think that this movie does start with a young character being the voice of progress, because it starts with Eugene Morgan as a young man, like with a prototype of a car. Like he's the future. Where it's just like this movie, really the bulk of the story takes place as he's older and it's already there, you know?
Yeah.
So,
and Lucy is obviously pro car. So, you know.
Sure. but I do think you're right that it is interesting that then we have George as this young man who's like, screw all this shit, I want the old ways. But I mean, why wouldn't he? Like, look at the way he's lived. He's a privileged little fuck.
Make America great again.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I was...
Sorry, go ahead, Alicia.
Oh, I was just going to say, I was sorry we didn't get to see a little bit more of the middle-aged love story between Eugene and Isabel. Because I wasn't sure. Yeah. We didn't really see any of their youthful love story, except for him tripping over and breaking the instrument. And then we just kind of saw them already at some sort of understanding and then breaking up. So we didn't really get any of the fun part of their love
No,
story.
they really
tortured kissed them. Hands a little bit.
I had to rewatch that scene because I wasn't sure what really happened and why they broke up. Like, it just was sort of like, it was almost like an afterthought, you know, for them breaking up. I thought it was kind of strange.
Yep.
Well, he was drunk apparently, which I totally missed. Jeremiah had to tell me. I was like, oh, I thought he just fell, and I was like, this bitch.
When they were young,
when they were young.
He embarrassed her by being drunk in her front yard. They say that at some point, but it's really fast. And then later they reference it again when they're like, he had his last drink so long ago because he stopped drinking after that.
You know, the woman who played her is the grandmother of Drew Barrymore, Dolores Costello.
I didn't know that. I was just going to say he got off easy because I don't know if he would have developed the car if he had married her. I think he would have had to follow whatever the Amberson family was. It was obvious because George wasn't technically an Amberson, but they always was like, you're an Amberson. Oh, wait, you're actually a whatever his last name was.
Minifer?
Yeah.
Yeah, they always had to correct themselves. So I think, like, you know, his life would have been totally different if he had married her.
The other thing that I thought was weird is like, okay, so Eugene's wife has died at some point, right? Lucy's like, whatever, totally. Like, they never talk about her. And it's like really clear to everyone that, okay, Eugene has been in love with Isabel this whole time. And, you know, sure, I get it. He was like, okay, this relationship isn't going to work out. You've abandoned me. I'm going to go off and meet someone else. But like, you know, you still hold like a little bit of a flame in your heart or something like that. But like, it was just weird that, like, look at George's reaction compared to Lucy's reaction to their relationship. And maybe she is just, like, on drugs. But I just also thought that, like, she's supposed to be even younger than he is, because that's why she won't marry him, is because she's too young. But they never mention her mom. They never mention their memories. She has no objection to the relationship or even, like, uncomfortableness with it. And she, from the beginning scenes when they're at the party, I assume she knew all about the family from her dad just talking about them to her, because she seemed like in on the joke from the beginning, whereas Georgie's like, who is this, what's happening, all over the place. So maybe she had just already been like, oh, my dad, this is like his, young sweetheart. And okay, I don't really care. Sure. But I just thought the contrast between them was really interesting.
Yeah, I feel like a lot was put on the Lucy character. Like Laura was saying earlier, a lot was put on her. She was given a lot of weird, like, things to do in the movie that just don't really make sense or are not consistent character-wise. The actress, I think, is fine, and she pulled off all her scenes and everything. But yeah, we really don't get any of her inner life or thoughts or feelings at all. Even the end, even the creepy scene with her father at the end. Why wouldn't you want to move on and find someone? Why not? Why do you just want to be with your dad forever? That's
pretty
very,
cute.
very strange. He was, but
But he's your dad.
Still your dad.
Yeah,
I know. Especially because she's such like a belle of the ball. Like I loved at the beginning because I already hated Georgie when everyone is like, oh, and he's like, how long have you been in town for? And that whole thing.
Calling her a slut.
Yeah. Who gave you those flowers? I just did not understand why she even gave him the time of day after the first 3 minutes of their conversation.
Oh yeah, that scene when she was leaving the house, he's like, "Yo, you'll be ready at whatever time." And
Yeah.
she's like, "All right."
I was like, run, literally,
Deal
say
breaker.
out loud.
Deal breaker.
Yeah, like controlling, and how was Eugene not like? I don't think you should be in this relationship. Like he's like, he's an Amberson or he's Isabel Amberson's son, and I'm like, she seems really chill this whole time. She didn't seem crazy or controlling or anything.
I'm curious. I think, Laura, you get right of first refusal on this. Do you want to answer it or think about it? Because you seem to have disliked the movie the most. I think we all saw it as like at least compromise, but various levels of still being satisfied by the movie. But you seem to have not liked it. So do you have a favorite moment or scene in the movie?
Well, I think I mentioned the part, the ludicrous moment where he was just like, shoot me, just shoot me. It reminded me of this film, Arsenic and Old Lace, with Cary Grant, where one of the crazy relatives is always like, bully, just bully. And it's more comical. And the film is literally about two old women that murder people, but it's done and there's levels to it. And you don't feel like you're losing time in an hourglass by watching it. So that was, I think, the pinnacle of the worst part of what the film was for me. Hated it. I mean, I like listening to Orson Welles' voice. I thought the reading of the credits at the end was fun in the radio show style. That was cool. I'm
Anybody
lucky
else?
I got to that part.
You're lucky.
I agree. I had a lot of little things like that I liked a lot about it. And I did, even though the ending kind of, as I said, I felt kind of robbed by the ending. I still did enjoy watching the movie, and I was entertained by it. And I liked that there was a line that I liked. I don't even remember who said it, but it was, there aren't any times but new times. And I kind of thought that sort of set the tone for the struggle that they were about to go through. So I liked that, but the ending just really takes a lot away from it.
Yeah, I like that line about new times because there's no bearing on it. It's sort of like what progress is. It's like, it's a new time, it's not putting a judgment on it. But I felt like the ending should have been at the part where George was over his mother's bed and they had that voiceover about like he got his comeuppance, even though nobody cared at that point. I thought that was just a really interesting stopping point. I really liked that part because it kind of had come full circle where he was just the most hated guy in the town, and then all of a sudden, like nobody even thought about him anymore. Not all of a sudden, but just like nobody thought about him anymore.
That would have been really great, actually.
Yeah, it would have been kind of a depressing ending, but I felt like that was the ending we kind of needed, just to see.
It's more meaningful, at least.
Yeah. And another part I liked was when Georgie had like gotten to the fight with that kid, and then went back and talked to his parents, and was kind of holding court where he had the curls in his hair, and he was just sort of standing there. It looked like a painting. I really enjoyed that scene just because it just felt like, everything rose and set along what George wanted, pretty much. His parents weren't going to stop him. His grandfather wasn't going to stop him.
Mm-hmm. I actually was worried that George was going to be way worse than he turned out to be. He was not great, but I was like, this guy's going to kill someone.
Hey, he's only like in his 20s when the movie ends.
That's true.
Life is long.
I mean, I think he did kill someone.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
Mom
I
seemed
guess
fine
kinda
when she went to
did,
Paris.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, I will also clarify my comment. So I hated pretty much every single character in the movie, but I thought the movie itself was like so good. Like the shots, the set, the editing, like all of that kind of stuff. I thought it was just a really cool movie to watch. And I mean, I assumed you were supposed to hate at least most of the characters. And so I was like, okay, which I don't personally enjoy movies like that because they just make me stressed out. But yeah, so but okay, my favorite scene is when they went out when he like strong arms Lucy into going on that cutter ride with him. And then the car is having all those troubles and they're all like, Georgie, push the car, Georgie. And he's like dying, inhaling the exhaust. I honestly was like, is he gonna die right here? Because he was like choking on it and coughing, and they're all just laughing, and they're all sitting in the car and like not paying any attention to him whatsoever other than to tell him to push harder. And he's like, and I loved it. I was like, oh my God, just suffer, Georgie.
I had two that I wanted to, I guess, name check. The ballroom scene when he returns from school and everyone's there for him, even though they all hate him probably. I just did not remember, like I said, anything about this movie except the sleigh ride scene because we had to watch that over and over in school for some reason. I don't know why. But I think they use that as like a good example of some sort of editing or something. But I thought the way the ballroom scene was shot and staged was so like completely impressive. Like I just didn't recall it at all, and it just sort of was. I couldn't believe how they'd even done it because the camera is moving so fluidly and everything's in the perfect place at the perfect moment for the camera moves, and it's just I don't know how you do that in 1942 because they don't have steady cams. It's just like the technology and everything is just so different then, and it like they were still figuring out how to do things similar to that later on. Like nobody else could do something like that. And then the other scene that I really liked was the dinner scene when Eugene doesn't take the insult and like runs with his monologue about progress and how George might be right. I really liked that monologue.
When you were talking about how they made the ballroom scene, they built it as a real house, but with walls that contracted and came down so that they were able to run the camera through and do all those crazy shots.
Yeah, I mean that's what I think is so impressive about it is that like they don't have steady cams in, so they have to figure out other ways to do it. And other people just either weren't doing that or weren't allowed to do that sort of thing then. Like this did happen in a moment. I think it's important to kind of recognize, and maybe we'll talk about this more actually next week, but that Orson Welles for a little bit of time could do anything he wanted and no one could stop him basically. And so he could be like, we're going to do it this way and you have to pay for it because you agreed to that. And they couldn't really say no. And that's ultimately part of why they fucked him over with the edit probably. But
was that because he had had success with Citizen Kane, or
no? If anything, the opposite is, or they Citizen Kane made them want to take control away from him, but they'd already made this deal with him. They had a multi-picture deal with him, based off of his acclaim as like a Broadway and radio star.
Oh, okay.
It was such a huge deal when he went to Hollywood and started making Citizen Kane, and they thought they were like getting into the greatest deal they ever had, and then like the whole Hearst thing came about with Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
But let's save that for another time because we will be talking about that movie. But Alicia, you had something you wanted to say before?
We just kind of touched on it a little bit. I was just going to ask about the scenes when they're walking around the house and they're going up and down the stairs and down the hallways, and sometimes they're in shadow and sometimes they're in light. And I just thought it was really interesting. And I just thought a lot of the choices that he made about the lighting in those scenes just were interesting, because sometimes they're not even in shadow. Sometimes they're almost completely in darkness and you can only hear their voices.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was all I was going to mention. It was just, I found that interesting as well. We didn't really discuss it. So
it was interesting watching this movie with so many close-up shots in it after watching Joan of Arc and talking about those close-up shots so much. Like I was thinking about that when I was watching it.
It was interesting watching I Married a Witch, which was made the same year, because the use of black and white that they used in this movie was so different than how I had seen it with just more of a conventional shot movie that was in black and white. It was sort of like they used black and white as kind of one of the characters in the Magnificent Ambersons, just the way that it was sort of composed of the shots and everything.
Right.
There was another cool shot, I think, when Fanny was arguing with George near the end of the movie, and they went through the doors, and they kept moving the camera as they went to the double doors at the end, and it was like one continuous shot, but you saw them move the camera as they were going through the doors. I thought that was a really interesting shot.
Mm-hmm. So now that we've all kind of shared our opinions on the movie, how about we look back at what people said about it at the time, and we could see how that stacks up to what we think of it. So the New York Times called it an exceptionally well-made film dealing with a subject scarcely worth the attention which is lavished upon it, which is kind of like a nice double-edged sword there, I think.
I second that. I feel like that is exactly, if I was a more literary person, what I would say.
And then Time magazine said it's a great motion picture, adult and demanding. Artistically, it is a textbook of advanced cinema technique, the novel use of side lighting and exaggerated perspective that made Kane seem unlike any other movie, floods Ambersons with the same revealing eloquence, examining faces, bathrooms, streets, the cluttered detail of the Ambersons' magnificence from a viewpoint so fresh that it creates a visual suspense in the very act of clarification. So pretty much what you were saying before about close-ups and shadows and all that stuff, right? And then, of course, we kind of mentioned before that it was nominated for 4 Oscars. Those were for Best Picture, Best Supporting Actress for Agnes Moorehead, and then Best Black and White Cinematography and Best Black and White Art Direction. And that was the year that Mrs. Miniver won Best Picture. So this did not win, obviously. It didn't win any Oscars. And then Tim Holt, who plays George, did win Best Actor from the National Board of Review, which I found kind of surprising. And Agnes Moorehead won Best Actress, not Supporting Actress, from National Board of Review and the New York Film Critics Circle. So the movie definitely had some acclaim at the time, I think it's safe to say, although who knows, maybe it could have been more if it was the movie that it was intended to be originally, or maybe not. And then just for the purposes of what this podcast sort of is, it was on the Sight and Sound poll twice. In 1972, it ranked at number 8. And in 1982, it ranked at number 7. So it's been a little bit since it was listed on the poll. And it took a little bit for it to get onto the poll. So I feel like every time I say on the poll, it seems like I'm talking about something else.
Just picturing Orson Welles on that poll.
Orson Welles on the poll.
That's what Georgie had to resort to after he lost all the money.
So with all that historical context,
Making it rain.
Has the movie, as far as you're concerned, and I think we've kind of said this in longer ways, but let's sum up our feelings. Has it stood the test of time?
I did find it entertaining, but I don't know if I would put it in like the top 10. I wouldn't put it as high as it's ranked on this list, personally.
Well, they wouldn't either anymore.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, I don't know if, I think it has held up for where the time was when it came out, but I don't know if it necessarily holds up to today's standard, I guess, of movies. But I feel like, I don't know, it was definitely well made, and it was definitely like it had a point of view that I really thought was interesting. I don't necessarily need to like or dislike something to get something out of it. So I did get something out of it, but I don't know where I was going with that. But yeah, I don't know if it necessarily holds up.
I'll say that I think that it's a little bit of both. I enjoy the movie, but I don't know how much of my enjoyment of it is knowing the backstory of the movie and the loss of what could have been. I don't know how much that is tied up in what makes this movie a classic. It's kind of hard to say. You can't separate the two. I think if you know anything about that story and the history of the production and Wells, like the trajectory of his life after this, or his career at least, although I would say both. So to me, it's sort of hard to answer this question. I think I'm not sure the movie actually does stand up to the test of time, because I'm not sure it's easy for people today to engage with the movie like this, but I do think it's a weird curiosity that film buffs are always going to want to go back to and wonder about what could have been. So it's, I don't know, it's like I said, it's hard to separate those two competing things, I think.
That's why it's so high up on the list. I think it's more of like everybody knows so much about the making of the movie that it's sort of like they're imposing their own thoughts about it to make it better than it really is.
Yeah, and I wonder if 1972 and 82, if that like stretch of years was when Orson Welles was really on the rounds telling people about like this movie could have been great, and all the filmmakers who were coming up then were people he'd influenced, and or the critics at least that were voting at that time were people that loved Orson Welles so much and had like re-examined his career, but then they sort of were like, yeah, it was really good. We talked about it. Now let's move on to other movies for 1992 and so on. But Laura and Mia, did you have anything?
Nothing really to add. I mean, I think the film techniques and stuff like that in it are incredible. You know, I agree with you. Like, it's amazing that they were able to get some of these shots and things like that so early on in film existence. But like, I mean, the story didn't really do that much for me. So I think it stands up as more a curiosity, what could have been, you know, that kind of thing, as opposed to just like the movie standing alone.
I wasn't that impressed with the shots or the visual shadow element of the film, the Caravaggio darkness. I thought it was all very melodramatic and didn't ring true. And I'm also probably one of the few people that do not want to see the longer version of the film, because I just think it would have continued with more of the same.
You know, one thing I did think about was, remember that movie AI that came out?
Yeah, Spielberg.
Where that was one of those movies where like I kind of liked it up until like the ending, which made me retroactively dislike the movie. So I'm thinking about like how would the movie be if the director had been alive, like when he made the movie that he wanted to make, and how much people would have, you know, had a different perspective of it. Because I don't think that movie, like when you look at it later, people really stack it up to being like a really great movie.
It has some people who really love it though.
AI?
Yeah.
Really?
There are people who think that movie is a complete masterpiece, and I don't quite get it. But I also haven't watched it in like probably close to 20 years now, I guess. So I don't know.
That's like some Reddit group that like meets on Tuesdays.
Right.
But that's what it made me think about, like this movie. Like it's never as good as the movie that you made in your head.
Yeah. Or the movie you just imagine could have been, because that, like, for people who don't know AI, of course, that was a movie that Stanley Kubrick had developed for years, and then he died, and Steven Spielberg went and made it. And if you know anything about those two filmmakers, there's some overlap, but there's plenty of differences in their approaches to filmmaking and storytelling. So it's just like kind of impossible to know what Stanley Kubrick's version of that would have been, I think. Although there's also reports that he always wanted Spielberg to be the one to make it. So who fucking knows? Anyway, should we move on to our bonus question?
Yes, let's do that.
Okay. So, Stephen, you picked our bonus question this time around, and you asked us all to name our favorite movie that scared us. And you specified that it's not your favorite scary movie, because sometimes there's a difference, but a movie that legitimately frightened you. First of all, like we posted this in our Facebook group and got some really interesting answers that we'll share in a second. But I'm kind of curious. I wasn't quite sure what you meant by that, or if you saw the answers people gave and if you thought that they adhered to your standard of what you were trying to ask for. I'm kind of curious.
I think what people had answered in the Facebook were more accurate, because I was thinking about asking, because I think Alicia last week had asked, or last time we had the podcast, was what's your favorite scary movie? And I think she had mentioned like maybe Nightmare on Elm Street. And I feel like there is a difference. Sometimes you just enjoy the movie because it's not necessarily scary, but it's qualified as a scary movie. Because one of my favorite scary movies is Scream, but it's not necessarily scary, but I enjoyed how it played out in the actors and the performances. But there were some other movies that actually like it made me scared when I watched it, or it gave me nightmares. So I feel like what people had answered in the Facebook page was kind of accurate as to that.
Okay. So do we want to go around and share our answers? Then we'll share some from our Facebook group. Anybody want to start?
Sure.
I'll start. So I don't really find movies to be that scary. It's impossible for me to divorce my feelings about a movie from knowing that it's fiction. Like I don't get scared by fiction films. So I guess what I realized in trying to answer this question is that documentaries tend to scare me more because they show stuff that's real, and sometimes that stuff is fucking frightening. So I answered Citizen 4 in our Facebook group because there's a moment in that movie that just always creeps me out the few times I've seen it, and where they're in this hotel room, and it's about Edward Snowden, of course, and he's starting to tell reporters his story, and he wants to take apart the phones basically, and maybe some other devices, I don't recall now, just to make sure there's no bugs in them. And as soon as he starts to do that, or pretty quickly afterwards, the fire alarm goes off. And I don't think they specifically or explicitly say it, but they heavily imply that he at least believes that the CIA might have set off the fire alarms to get them out of the room so they could come back and rebug the room. Who knows? But it's just kind of a creepy moment. And it's things like that I think scare me in movies more than other things.
The government bugging you.
No, just that I'm like, oh, this is a real thing that happens in the world, and that's kind of, or it could be.
Yeah.
Like another one is like movies about the financial crisis. I'm like, I can't believe this happened. I can't believe it could happen again. Like that sort of thing.
It's a good answer.
I'm kind of on the same page with you, Jeremiah, as far as like scary movies don't really scare me. I don't scare very easy from fiction or monsters or like slasher films or anything like that. But the movie Zodiac, about the hunt for the Zodiac killer, with Jake Gyllenhaal, that movie freaked me out. There's a scene where he goes to meet this guy to ask him about someone that used to work for him at a movie theater, because he thinks this guy might have been the Zodiac killer. And he looked at the handwriting, and he said the handwriting on the movie poster, the handwriting on something in the movie theater matched the handwriting that the people at the newspaper, the letters they were receiving. And he goes into this guy's house and they talk, and he takes him down to his basement, and they're just like alone in this leaky, dark basement. And the guy's like, oh, that's my handwriting. And I was like, get out of there. I had to like turn on every light in my house and like open my bedroom door and be like, the house is empty. There's no one in here. Like everything's fine. You're fine. You're alone. Like there's no boogeyman. But yeah, that really scared me. But yeah, real stories. They're true stories. Freak me out.
I could see that. So I put on our Facebook page that The Shining was the movie that scared me the most. And I saw that pretty late in life. I saw that when I was in college with a group of my friends. And overall, the movie is just very scary, the way that it's directed, and the music and just the shots that they use are just very creepy. And it also has that kind of vibe, since it was made so long ago, that, it's more practical in the way that they use the effects. But the part that got me the most was when Shelley Duvall's character goes through his novel and realizes he's just been writing over and over again, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. That to me was just like, it freaked me out, just because you realize how crazy he really is, because he's writing page after page of the same thing. And that just like, it really bothered me for some reason. And I had nightmares about it later.
What scares me about that scene is that someone had to sit there and type all that out on a typewriter in 1979 or whatever, when they made that.
What I was going to say is, so after we watched The Magnificent Ambersons, then we watched some YouTube video that had all of these like movies with alternate endings that were cut or whatever. And most of them were really stupid. But the one that scared the shit out of me. So I scare at everything. Like every movie is so scary to me. So I am the opposite of you guys. But there was apparently a scene at the end of The Shining when she's in the hospital, and then they come and tell her, like the police come and tell her that they couldn't find his body. And I was like, oh my God. And they had some scenes of it. So they must have found it, but it hasn't been.
No, there's just production stills. The
okay.
Footage, everyone thinks Kubrick destroyed all the footage that he had used in the movies.
But even in the stills, it just looks so scary. And I just feel like I've seen that movie a couple times. Like I can imagine it really well. And I was like, oh my God, like that would be so scary. You never know when he's going to pop back up. But for my answer for this, my scariest movie and the thing that scared me the most is Hereditary, which is, oh my God. Like we saw it in theaters, I think the weekend it came out or something, and I have never been so scared ever in my life before. I was like, thought I was going to cry. I almost had to leave the theater at one point because I was just like, I'm going to have a heart attack right now. And like, usually when you see a scary movie, even in theaters where everything's like bigger and louder and more intense and stuff, like, I don't know, it's like there's a scary scene and then it passes, or like, you kind of know, like I feel like most scary movies tend to be pretty predictable. This movie, I feel like checked every box for me of like, I'm terrified of like scary like religion possession things, stuff with creepy children, being alone out in the woods. Like it was just like everything. And then especially towards the end when shit is just going nuts and Toni Collette's character is like crawling on the attic ceiling and stuff, and does her head spin around there? I think I've just like blocked it out because it was so scary. But I just like, oh my, I'm like sweating talking about it right now because it was just so.
It's a very scary movie.
It's so
that is a very
I've watched
scary
it at
movie.
home. We watched it at home once and it wasn't as bad. So I definitely think like being in a movie theater in the dark with a bunch of people, plus like I'd already seen it once. I mean, it was still really scary, but it wasn't like, I didn't feel like I needed to like turn it off and lay down for a while.
Yeah, there's definitely a handful of movies that we've gone to where I have to like pull my hand away from her because she's squeezing it so hard. And I don't remember specifically that was one of those, but it had to be.
It had to
I'm
be.
sure. Yeah. And then, we also recently watched a TV show, but we watched The Haunting of Hill House, which I guess, no, we watched The Haunting of Bly Manor, but The Haunting of Hill House came before that. I haven't seen Hill House because my sister told me that it's even scarier than Bly Manor, and it got like cheesy and dumb as it went on, but the first like 2 or 3 episodes I was like, I can't sleep. Like I was so scared. And like same thing, Alicia, it was like, I need to check my house, I don't know like what's in here. So that was also, I wouldn't put it in like top 10 or anything, but it's just like a recent very terrifying thing that I watched.
Laura?
I had a really hard time with this question because I was thinking about all the different periods of my life where films sat with me and freaked me out. Like when you're young and Watership Down just ruined everything for you. And then, or The Last Unicorn and how dark those films were. But, and I was thinking maybe the 80s and the whole Brian De Palma stuff, because I don't really gravitate to straight horror films or like thrillers. But what because it was, the question is your favorite movie that scared you. I chose Under the Skin. It's a 2013 science fiction film by Jonathan Glazer, based on a novel by Michael Faber, or Faber, however you say it. We read one of his books in our book club, Alicia and Stephen, The Book of Strange New Things. This was a different book, but I thought that movie was it was beautifully shot, unsettling in a way that stayed with me far too long after I saw it. I thought it was just incredibly creepy and smart, and I don't even have the words, really. If you haven't seen it, you should really watch it. Scarlett Johansson does an incredible job.
So before Mia and I met, that was one of the weirdest date movies I went on. With some like person I barely knew, we went on. That was the date we went on, and that movie is so weird to go on a date to.
I bet. Since you're married now, we won't ask how the date went, but
when I was thinking about answers for this and like thinking about like scary movies and whatever, trying to think of like scenes that had scared me, I was like, wow, though, what is scarier than like what we've been living through for the past year? Like this mysterious global pandemic, government insurrection, like mass death, like I just, everything, wildfires, like the list goes on, and I was just like, shit, when the movie about now comes out, like that's going to be the scariest one.
Sure, these are scary times for sure. I was just going to add that, however, if you do want to scare me for some reason, all you have to do is put a ventriloquist dummy somewhere in my line of vision, and I'm out. I'm done. You'll have to like drive me home because I'll be searching for.
We'll remember that.
a gun to shoot it with, or I'll be ready for like the loot. I just can't take ventriloquist dummies. Can't take it.
There's a late 70s, early 80s movie called Magic, I think. And there's a ventriloquist dummy or like that's in the ads. And when I was a kid, I couldn't watch TV because that ad would just show up and I would freak out. Like, it was very scary. And I watched it again like recently, and I remembered the time when I was a kid. I'm like, why am I watching this? I'm still scared of it.
I feel like there was an
so
Are You Afraid of
scary.
the Dark with a ventriloquist something in it. I don't know.
Gosh.
Do you know
Did
that
did any of
Candace
y'all watch that show? It was
Bergen's
terrifying.
dad was a very famous ventriloquist,
Mhm.
and
That's
that
right.
he would the dummy had a bigger, more prominent bedroom, and that there's
Than
this whole,
her?
there's all these different. It's just
Wait, whose father?
Candace
I missed-
Bergen,
Oh, okay.
and then there were
Oh.
some moments where he would enact as if he was talking. They were both dummies, and she'd have to
Stop.
go along with the conversation that he.
No.
This is
Wow.
true, and there's some really creepy stories about that. That
That's
Mhm.
terrifying.
I'm only
And
scratching
that-
the surface.
And that dummy's name was Murphy Brown.
Quirky.
How about we share some of the films that people told us about on Facebook?
I really liked
So-
the reactions that we got.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did too. So Becky said that the steamroller scene in Who Framed Roger Rabbit still gives her the willies. And I would add to that the scene where they dip the shoe
The dip.
early on.
That was
Yeah.
dark.
That one, yeah.
Yeah.
It's so it's like putting a puppy down or something. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
That was tough,
Um,
that movie.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
kids'
so,
movie.
Yeah.
it was,
We rewatched that recently. I don't think it's a kid's movie.
It's not
honestly.
a kid's movie. Yeah.
Bob
Yeah, it's kind of crazy that it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Bob
Teresa said Labyrinth was terrifying, which I know I saw that movie, but I can't remember it. It was so long ago.
Labyrinth
I
is
was
like a
kid.
movie that I don't remember either. I've seen it
Yeah.
multiple times, and there's only one line I remember, and it's that last line of the film.
Which is
You have no power over me. My will is as strong as yours.
I'm scared. Abby said that I guess it's the scene between Bilbo Baggins and what's his face? Golem?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think he gets.
No, it's with Bilbo
I
with
don't remember.
Frodo.
Frodo,
Does he
yeah.
And
Oh,
they're
with
trying
Frodo.
to
Does
stop
he
the
get-
ring.
The ring has
Mhm.
possessed
Yeah.
him because
Okay.
it's like eventually you turn into a golem,
Yeah.
right?
It's just so
With the
he has
ring.
this one moment of really,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
But-
It's
but
like
she-
a flash, but it's so scary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but she shared a still from it and it did look terrifying.
It did, yeah.
Yeah.
To me, it looked
Yeah.
a lot like Pee Wee Herman's when the truck driver,
Oh,
yes.
Large Marge.
Large Marge, they looked very similar in the
Mhm.
prosthetic.
Yes.
Yeah, because you completely don't expect it. Because I remember that scene in the movie, and I remember freaking out when I saw it too. Because he turns around and he's suddenly like, "I want the ring again," and he just like goes crazy.
Yeah.
I say I don't remember it. I've blocked all of Lord of the Rings from my
Really?
memory. Yes.
Really? I've only seen them all once, but I really like.
Oh, I watched them whenever, like when Trump won, I couldn't move and I wasn't verbal. And the only thing that made sense was just watching the Lord of the Rings. Just,
Lord of the
good is
Rings.
good and evil is evil. And you just kind of, things make sense in the Shire. And it, I slowly, 8 hours later, I was okay.
I've never seen any of the Lord of the Rings films at all.
What?
No,
Wow.
not for me. I tried to watch one on an airplane once, and I did not make it 5 minutes before I just fell asleep. I have no interest in them at all. I'm not saying they're bad.
No, I
I just
get that,
never.
yeah.
I just have no interest in them.
Yeah.
But I like other fantasy. Like, I watched and read all the Game of Thrones books and the show and all of Harry Potter, and I grew up reading Chronicles of Narnia and all of that. I just never got into the Lord of the Rings.
We should do
so
a
it's out
plane
there.
podcast of like the most embarrassing movies we've watched and enjoyed on
On an
the plane.
airplane. Oh,
Well,
God.
or just
God.
movies that
Big
are
Mama's
like,
House
when-
too. Pitch Perfect.
When you were
three.
I
talking
watched that casino movie with Amy Poehler and Will Ferrell. I watched that on an airplane one time.
Oh
I don't
Oh,
know.
where they
I was
turn
a
their
little bit
house into a
like,
casino?
which one?
Where they turn their house into a casino?
Yes.
Yeah.
can't
I don't
remember
know
the name
that
of it.
movie.
I think it came and went real fast.
It
was like- it was
You're
like-
on an airplane.
3 months of marketing, then you'd barely know it was out.
Okay.
It was just
It was
one of
better
those.
than I was expecting. I was like, oh, maybe I'll fall asleep during this, but I enjoyed it.
I think they make
enjoyed it.
movies sometimes specifically for airplanes. Like they just
Yes.
know it's just going to be on an
I'm
airplane.
into it.
Yeah, most Melissa McCarthy movies I think are made for airplanes.
Yeah.
And we
Isn't it
are
like
the better
Spy?
for them.
Are
Our
we?
travel, yeah.
She makes some
Spy
trash
is,
movies.
To me, is genius.
Oh,
Spy is good.
Or
I'm not a
Heat.
huge fan of Spy, but I understand that one is better than other ones she's made, like Identity Theft or whatever it's called.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I watched
Yeah.
that on a plane.
Well, there's
I think I
Terrible
did watch that on a
fucking-
plane too.
Yeah,
those films are really uneven. They meander and they don't have quite the ending that you're set up to get, and so it's almost sort of like Magnificent Ambersons.
there you
To
go.
bring it full circle.
False.
I think if we just tacked on
False.
45 minutes of decay and
to Identity Thief.
yeah, I think then we would
Yeah,
have
yeah.
a real genius film in our hands.
Maybe it couldn't get worse.
I'm definitely down to do a spin-off podcast though that just talks about movies on planes, because I feel like like so many movies that I watch are on planes, and I feel like there's like certain movies that like I would just never watch, but I'm like, ooh, I know they're in like Delta's selection and I can't wait. Or like I hardly ever rewatch movies, but I'll like rewatch something on a plane. I don't know. I just feel like this whole like lane of my movie watching life has been cut off with not traveling
It does
anymore.
feel a bit stunted. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
miss
watched
it.
Magnificent Ambersons twice, and for as much as
Oh,
I
wow.
disliked it.
Oh,
Wow.
I really wanted to try and wrap my head around it because I had such a visceral negative reaction to it.
I respect that.
Thanks.
So we have two more answers to our bonus question. So Andrea said that as a kid, the Skeksis Emperor dying in bed, and this is from The Dark Crystal,
Yep.
was what scared her, and his face melting apart.
It's a scary
yeah.
movie for a
And then
kid,
as an
too.
adult, the basement night vision scene in Silence of the Lambs. So yeah, I'll vouch for both of those.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I don't remember much about The Dark Crystal, but I remember being kind of scared by it as a kid.
I couldn't watch it. It was too scary.
It was too scary for me.
I don't think
I
I've
just
seen
said
it.
no.
Yeah. And then I think Max had an interesting answer that went a different direction. Amor. So I don't know who's seen that movie, but sure, it's fucking scary.
What is the plot? Have I seen it?
It's about I didn't see it with you.
Okay, then I haven't seen it.
It's another date that didn't work out.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, the way
Yeah.
he said that, I didn't see
it
it.
is actually, I guess.
I see what you
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, it's about a woman dying of
Terrifying.
old age and dementia, basically.
Gross and terrifying.
Yeah, and her husband
Aw.
is like becoming her caretaker. And any other quick ones anybody wants to throw out, or should we go ahead and wrap things up?
I can share another quick one because
Okay.
everything scares me. So this is an easy topic. Also, the movie before I saw Hereditary, the scariest movie to me was The Ring, which like after I saw that, I couldn't sleep alone in my room for like a week probably, and I was like in high school, so it was really embarrassing. I just remember when I saw it, it was Halloween, and then my friend came over and spent the night at my house, and she like pulled up in front of my house in her car, and there was some bushes on the side, and I'd had to get out into the bushes, and I was like, no, I wouldn't. I was like, Samara's in those bushes right there. I crawled out of her car. And then, because she was my friend and was like staying at my house, so like she was sleeping in the bed and I was sleeping on like an air mattress on the floor, and I was just like terrified that Samara was gonna crawl out from under the bed and kill me, and it just scared the living daylights out of me. Like even now, when I think about her in that closet in like the first 5 minutes of the movie, it just
When it comes to scary films, I feel like an underrated movie that I saw is called The Invitation from 2015 that really stuck with me. I don't really see it on a lot of lists or anything, but it really scared me and stayed with me if you guys ever come across it.
It's a movie that was universally panned and there's a lot wrong with it, but Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, and just the series Twin Peaks, it's great. But that movie, the first time I saw it, really, really got under my skin and scared me. David Lynch does that sort of like menacing, creepy thing so well, and that does really get me. He scares me a lot. His films scare me. But it's not a great movie, but it did scare me, and I did sort of enjoy the experience of that.
This was a
overall, I
good question,
guess.
though. I really enjoyed
Yeah.
thinking about
Mhm.
it, Stephen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So our next episode is Laura's pick. So Laura, do you want to remind us what that will be?
Well, it's Citizen Kane. I'm really looking forward to watching it, and I really hope that the ghost of Orson Welles doesn't haunt me, because I was so just anti Magnificent Ambersons.
And of course, it was released in 1941, and it is available to watch with an HBO Max or a TCM subscription. You can also rent it on Amazon, Google, YouTube, and plenty of other places online. Or, go buy it somewhere physically. So, like we said before, the Stereoactive Movie Club isn't supposed to be just the five of us chatting. We want it to be an open discussion for people who want to be included. So please do watch Citizen Kane and share your thoughts. You can do that by joining our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Stereoactive Movie Club, or you can email us at stereoactivemovieclub@gmail.com, or you can send us a voice message on our show page at anchor.fm/Stereoactive Movie Club. Thank you, everybody.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This podcast is produced by Stereoactive Media.